And of course, I'm going to have some Ted Cruz news. Even though the Senate is out of session, he's still going around doing great things for us, the people, in Texas and around the United States. I have a letter here that was on the 4th from Ted Cruz to the Texans. He says, "Greetings. For nearly 7 years, Obamacare has failed millions of hard-working Texans and American families across the country. This disastrous law has increased health care costs, robbed Americans of good-paying jobs, and drastically limited insurance and provider choices as completion within the Obamacare exchanges has dwindled. For far too long, Washington bureaucrats have intruded between you and your doctor. Sadly, Texans are facing the largest reduction in the number of Obamacare insurance plans in the country. Over the past year, 9 insurance companies have left Obamacare, leaving only 10 insurance carriers in the state. And for 2017, Texans are averaging premiums are going skyrocket by more than 36%. This is unacceptable. Texans deserve better. I'm proud to have released a video this week underscoring President Obama's broken health care promises. And I will continue to lead the fight to fully repeal Obamacare and replace it with bold, innovative reforms that put patients and their providers in the driver's seat, for not federal bureaucrats. Keep Texas strong. Ted Cruz. This week, in addition to continuing the fight against Obamacare, Senator Cruz has worked with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick to highlight Texas' efforts in protecting the lives of unborn children and reveal the horrific practices of Planned Parenthood. So right now we're going to do the quick video on Obamacare from Ted Cruz, and then I will read you about what Governor Dan Patrick and Ted Cruz are doing.
No matter what you've heard, if you like your doctor or healthcare plan, you can keep it. If you don't have insurance, you'll finally be able to afford insurance. And everyone will have the security and stability that's missing today.
Senator Cruz and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick recently penned an op-ed for the Houston Chronicle highlighting Texas' continued leadership in the fight for life and calling on Congress to end taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood. Senator Cruz and Lieutenant Governor Patrick make the case that Congress should protect the lives of unborn children and the well-being of their mothers. Planned Parenthood callous disregard for human life stands at a stark reminder that one of our highest ideas, that all people are endowed by God with the unalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, remains unfulfilled. Senator Cruz and Lieutenant Governor Patrick wrote, Planned Parenthood believes that unborn babies who are unwanted are undeserving of life. Fortunately, most Texans disagree. The people of Texas have embraced the truth that is written on every human heart, that children are a God-given blessing who not only bring joy and fulfillment, but perhaps most important, who teach us to love unconditionally. Senator Cruz and Lieutenant Governor Patrick continue, while Texas continues to lead on pro-life issues, it cannot alone win the struggle for life. The federal government must also take action. Congress should, once and for all, end all taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood, and it should enact the Conscience Protection Act, which would prohibit the federal government as well as state and local government that receive federal dollars for health-related activities from penalizing doctors for refusing to perform an abortion in violation of their conscience. Senator Graham and Senator Cruz seek legislation to defund UN over Israel Resolution 2334.
Senator Graham, let me ask you, the reason the two of you are standing there today is that you've introduced a new bill that would effectively defund UN because of that Israel resolution from which the United States abstained. Explain what you're seeking to do here together.
22% of the money to fund the UN comes from the American taxpayer. I don't think it's a good investment for the American taxpayer to give money to an organization that condemns the only democracy in the Mideast, takes the settlement issue and say that's the most important and only issue in terms of impediment to peace. I begged the UN months before, don't put me in this box. This was John Kerry and Obama taking a slap at Israel, and we're going to push back. I think most Americans believe that the United Nations has become more anti-Semitic, more anti-Israeli, and I'm a big internationalist, but we're going to stop the money until we get this fixed. And I appreciate Ted's leadership on this.
Senator Cruz?
Well, listen, the last month, what we've seen Barack Obama do to Israel, I think has been shameful. It's been on the way out. He has struck out repeatedly at Israel and done real damage. At the United Nations, the resolution that the Obama administration abstained from, and there are reports they actively orchestrated, was a profoundly anti-Israel resolution. It declares much of Israel illegal and illegitimate. Much of Jerusalem, it declares, is not legitimately part of Israel. It declares the Jewish quarter is not part of Israel. It says the Temple Mount, the holiest site for the Jewish people in Jerusalem, is not legitimately part of Israel.
Western Wall.
And the Western Wall, I mean, we all remember the image of Barack Obama wearing a yarmulke, standing in front of the Western Wall. He's now signed on to the proposition that that is illegal occupied territory. That is shameful. And in my view, we need to act to defend not only our friend and ally, the nation of Israel, but also U.S. interest. And so Lindsay and I today are joining and filing legislation that would end all U.S. taxpayer funding for the UN unless and until they reverse this resolution. It's very simple. The only way to get their attention, we can give speeches, we can pass resolutions, and the UN is going to ignore what we have to say. But if you cut off their money, that gets their attention. And I think we've got real prospects of seeing this thing move through Congress and actually turning this thing around.
Senator Cruz questions Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General pick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Sessions, congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
You are a friend. You are a man of integrity. You and I have worked closely together on this committee, on the Armed Services Committee, and I have every confidence you are going to make a superb Attorney General. You know, this has been an interesting day at this hearing, listening to Democratic senator after Democratic senator give speeches in praise of the rule of law. And I am heartened by that. I am encouraged by that, because for 8 years it's been absent. For 8 years we've seen a Department of Justice consistently disregarding the rule of law. When Eric Holder's Department of Justice allowed illegal gun transactions, illegally sold guns to Mexican gun traffickers as part of Fast and Furious, guns that were later used to murder Border Patrol agent Brian Terry, the Democratic members of this committee were silent. When Eric Holder was found in contempt of Congress for refusing to cooperate with Congress's investigation into Fast and Furious, once again the Democratic members of this committee were silent. When the IRS illegally targeted United States citizens for exercising the First Amendment views, for exercising their roles in the political process, Democratic members of this committee were silent. When the Department of Justice refused to fairly investigate the IRS targeting citizens and indeed assign the investigation to a liberal partisan Democrat who had given over $6,000 to President Obama and Democrats on this committee were silent. When numerous members of this committee called on the Attorney General to appoint a special prosecutor to ensure that justice was done in the IRS case, Democrats on this committee were silent. When the Justice Department began using Operation Choke Point to target law-abiding citizens that they disagreed with politically, you know, free speech is a wonderful thing. When the Department of Justice used Operation Choke Point to target legal businesses because they disagreed politically with those businesses, the Democrats on this committee were silent. When the Obama Justice Department sent millions of dollars of taxpayer monies to sanctuary cities that were defying federal immigration law, the Democrats on this committee were silent. When the Obama administration refused to enforce federal immigration laws and unilaterally rewrote those laws, the Democrats on this committee were silent. When the Obama administration released tens of thousands of criminal illegal aliens, including rapists and murderers, into the general population, Democrats on this committee were silent. When the Department of Justice signed off on the Obama administration paying a nearly $2 billion ransom to Iran, contrary to federal law, the Democrats on this committee were silent. When the Obama administration ignored and rewrote provision after provision of Obamacare, contrary to the text of the law, the Democrats on this committee were silent. When the Obama administration signed off on illegal recess appointments that the Supreme Court had to strike down unanimously, the Democrats on this committee were silent. And when the Obama administration released 5 Guantanamo terrorists without the required notification of Congress, the Democrats on this committee were silent. That pattern has been dismaying for 8 years, but I take today as a moment of celebration. If once again this committee has a bipartisan commitment to rule of law, following the law, that is a wonderful thing, and it is consistent with the tradition of this committee going back centuries. Now, if we were to play a game of tit for tat, if what was good for the goose were good for the gander, then a Republican Attorney General should be equally partisan, should disregard the law, should advance political preferences favored by the Republican Party. Senator Sessions, do you believe that would be appropriate for an Attorney General to do?
No, I do not. I believe you, and I think we do have to be aware that when something like this is done, and some of the things I'm familiar with enough to agree with you that I thought were improper, I do believe it has a corrosive effect on public confidence in the constitutional republic of which we are sworn to uphold.
I think you are exactly right. You and I are both alumni of the Department of Justice, and it has a long bipartisan tradition of staying outside of partisan politics, of simply and fairly enforcing the law. I will say right now, if I believed that you would implement policies, even policies I agreed with contrary to law, I would vote against your confirmation. And the reason I am so enthusiastically supporting your confirmation is I have every degree of confidence you will follow the law faithfully and honestly. And that is the first and most important obligation of the Attorney General. Earlier in this hearing, Senator Franken engaged you in a discussion that I think was intended to try to undermine your character and integrity. And in particular, Senator Franken suggested that you had somehow misrepresented your record. It is unfortunate to see members of this body impugn the integrity of a fellow senator with whom we have served for years. It is particularly unfortunate when that attack is not backed up by the facts. Senator Franken based his attack primarily on an op-ed written by an attorney, Gerald Hebert. There is an irony in relying on Mr. Hebert because, as you well know, in 1986, during your confirmation hearing, Mr. Hebert testified then and attacked you then, making false charges against you. And indeed, I would note in the 1986 hearing, 2 days later, Mr. Hebert was forced to recant his testimony, to say that he had given false testimony to this committee, and indeed to say, quote, "I apologize for any inconvenience caused Mr. Sessions or this committee by my prior testimony." So an individual who's testified falsely once before this committee, his op-ed is now the basis for Senator Franken's attack on you. And indeed, the basis of Senator Franken's attack is he claims you were uninvolved in several civil rights cases that were listed on your questionnaire. In 1986, Mr. Hebert testified, this is a quote from him, "I have needed Mr. Sessions' help in those cases, and he has provided that help every step of the way." Is that correct, that that's what Mr. Hebert testified?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, in the 4 cases Senator Franken referred to, you reported all 4 of them in your supplement to the Judiciary Committee. Is that right?
That is correct.
Mr. Franken didn't mention that. And let me point out, here's how you describe your involvement in your written submission to this committee. Quote, "For the cases described in 2, 4, 8, and 9, my role, like most U.S. attorneys in the nation and not with non-criminal civil rights cases, was to provide support for the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division's attorneys. I reviewed, supported, and co-signed complaints, motions, and other pleadings and briefs that were filed during my tenure as U.S. attorney. Provided assistance and guidance to the civil rights attorneys, had an open-door policy with them, and cooperated with them on these cases. For the cases described in 6, I supervised litigation and signed the pleadings." Now, that is consistent with the 1986 testimony that you provided help every step of the way. Is that correct?
Well, I think so, yes.
There's no question you've been forthright with this committee, and I would note that members of this committee don't have to search far and wide to know who Jeff Sessions is. We've known every day sitting at this bench alongside you. I want to shift to a different topic, and it's the topic I opened with, which is the politicization of the Department of Justice. The Office of Legal Counsel has a critical role of providing sound legal and constitutional advice, both to the Attorney General and the President. And in the last 8 years, we have seen a highly politicized OLC, an OLC that has given politically convenient rulings, whether on recess appointments, whether on executive amnesty. And early on, perhaps that was started by 2009 Attorney General Holder overruling OLC, concerning legislation trying to grant the District of Columbia representation in Congress. And it may well be that that sent a message to OLC that its opinions were to be political and not legal in nature. Tell me, Senator Sessions, what will you do as Attorney General to restore professionalism and fidelity to law to the Office of Legal Counsel?
Senator Cruz, I think any short-term political agenda gains that come from the abuse of the lawmaking processes and requirements of the Department of Justice just don't make sense. It will always, in the long run, be more damaging than the short-term gain that one might have. The Office of Legal Counsel, all of us who served in the department know, is a big-time position. You need a mature, smart, experienced person who understands this government, who understands the laws, and is principled and consistent in their application of the laws. That will help the President, it will help the Congress, and it will help the American people. I do believe we need to work hard to have that, and I will do my best to ensure we do have it.
One final question. In the last 8 years, the Department of Justice's Solicitor General's office has also, I believe, been unfortunately politicized, and it sustained an unprecedented number of unanimous losses before the United States Supreme Court. Indeed, President Obama's Justice Department won less than half of its total cases before the Supreme Court, which is the lowest presidential win rate since Harry Truman. The average historically for the last 50 years has been about 70%. Numerous of those cases were unanimous, with indeed both Obama Supreme Court appointees voting against the lawless positions of this Justice Department, including their assertion that the government has the authority to supervise and direct the appointment and the hiring and firing of clergy in the church. What will you do as Attorney General to ensure the integrity of the Office of Solicitor General, that it is faithful to the law and not advancing extreme political positions like the Obama Justice Department did that have been rejected over and over again by the Supreme Court?
I think the problem there is a desire to achieve a result sometimes that overrides the commitment to the law. In the long run, this country will be stronger if we adhere to the law, even though somebody might be frustrated in the short term of not achieving an agenda. The Solicitor General should not advocate to alter the meaning of words to advance an agenda. That is an abuse of office, and I would try to seek to have a Solicitor General who is faithful to the Constitution, serves under the Constitution, does not have the power to rise above it and make it say what it wants it to say.
Senator Cruz gets into the facts of David Cole's testimony against Jeff Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the members of this distinguished panel for being here today, and I want to take a special moment to thank Larry Thompson, who was my boss at the Department of Justice, although I would note that you should not hold Larry accountable for my many missteps in the years that followed. I want to start, Mr. Cole, by addressing your testimony. And I would note that the ACLU, I have worked alongside the ACLU on any number of issues here in the Senate, including we've worked alongside each other on issues of indefinite detention. We worked on the same side concerning the USA Patriot Act. We worked on the same side working to stop the efforts of Senate Democrats to amend the Constitution and to amend the free speech protections of the First Amendment. And so I am grateful for many of the good things the ACLU does. You're a professor at Georgetown. I would like to ask you, as a professor, how would you react to a student who submitted an exam with a one-sided and biased account of the facts that included only the facts on the students, supporting the student's view, and omitting everything else?
Well, first of all, Senator Cruz, thank you for where you've worked with us, and we hope to work with you in the future where our interests align. You know, what we did here with respect to Mr. Sessions.
I'll get into the facts for a moment.
Yes.
Just
so I think
you will indulge me and answer the question.
Right. So I think it would depend. That's not a good answer.
We'll get into the facts and substance in a moment. I think I'm on firm ground, observing that if you had a student who presented a one-sided and biased answer, you would grade them very poorly. I would also note you and I are both Supreme Court litigators, and any court would not look kindly at a litigant who omitted any facts or law that were to the contrary. Would you agree with that, that if you file a Supreme Court brief or do an oral argument and the case law that's against you, the facts that are against you, you just stick your head in the sand and ignore? That doesn't tend to be looked on too kindly by the Supreme Court or by any court?
No, I think you have to address the questions that are presented by the case, as I think we did with respect to...
Okay, good. Well, then let's get into the facts. You blasted, and I'll note that your testimony, I have to say your testimony, both written and oral, is disappointing to me. You characterized it as, quote, strictly nonpartisan. And yet you blasted Senator Sessions for prosecuting African-American civil rights leaders as a U.S. attorney in the 1980s and insinuating that doing so somehow made him a racist. And yet you did not mention in your written or oral testimony the fact that the complaints asking him to do so were brought by African-American citizens who felt that their votes were being abused and stolen. And indeed, I'd like to read a quote from LaVon Phillips, who's an African-American investigator for the Perry County District Attorney's Office, who said there was an ongoing, quote, black-on-black power struggle in Perry County. In 1982, the office received numerous complaints from incumbent black candidates and black voters that absentee ballot applications were being mailed to citizens' homes without their request. People were going to the polls trying to vote. They were told that they had already voted absentee when they did not. A grand jury, a majority of which was African American, asked in its official report for a federal investigation of voter fraud in Perry County because it was becoming very abusive and the black incumbent candidates at the time were rather terrified. That's the case that Senator Sessions brought as U.S. Attorney. And my question to you, Mr. Cole, is in your written and oral testimony, why did you omit the fact that the complaint came from African-American citizens, from elected African-American incumbent politicians, and the indictment came from a grand jury that was a majority African-American? Why did you omit those facts?
Well, I don't think I intentionally omitted those facts, Senator Cruz. What I did was to express our concerns about several aspects of that case, namely that Senator Sessions, as the U.S. Attorney, investigated only counties, not just Perry County, but only counties where black votes had gone up, not where white votes had gone up, but only where black votes had gone up, number one. Number two, that he had conducted the investigation in an extremely intrusive way, addressing black voters at their homes, asking them how they voted, why they voted, etc. Number three, that he took the position, the legal position, that advising somebody on how to vote, on who to vote for, was a crime. Now, you, Senator Cruz, when you were running for president, advised people on how to vote.
Well, you also admitted the fact that the evidence in the case showed absentee ballots had been tampered with, and indeed the defendant in the case admitted that he had changed absentee ballots. He argued it was with the voters' consent, but he admitted he had changed absentee ballots.
Right, and if you're
and my point is simple, Mr. Cole. This committee can assess what occurred there, but any law student or any litigant who presented such a one-sided picture of the fact, conveniently omitting every single fact that is to the contrary, would not be treated as a credible witness and would not be treated, as you describe your testimony, as strictly nonpartisan. Let me turn briefly to a second issue you brought up, which was the Tyco case. You said the Tyco case undermined Sessions' fitness for the job as Attorney General. And likewise, there are a number of facts that you just omitted from your discussion. Number one, the basis of your complaints was submitted to the Alabama Ethics Commission. And on July 10th, 1996, the Ethics Commission unanimously dismissed the charges against Sessions for insufficient facts. Now, you briefly mentioned that in your written testimony, but you omitted it from your oral testimony. Fact number two, the Alabama State Bar, one of Tyco's lawyers, filed a complaint with the Alabama State Bar based on the trial court's order that you quoted, alleging over 20 ethical violations. The Alabama State Bar adjudicated that matter And on February 16, 2000, the State Bar unanimously dismissed the complaint. Again, you omitted that fact from both your written and your oral testimony. That is nowhere to be found. But third, most strikingly, the language you rely on as the basis for your testimony. The Federal Court of Appeals, the 11th Circuit, concluded that that precise language concerning prosecutorial misconduct was, quote, particularly unreliable and misleading. It reversed a civil verdict based on it. And the 11th Circuit concluded there was, quote, no evidence in the record to support a finding that Tyco's federal constitutional rights were violated, and concluded that, quote, probable cause existed to prosecute Tyco. You omitted that fact that the Federal Court of Appeals profoundly repudiated that state court ruling you're relying on, and that, again, is not credible or impartial testimony. Now, I would ask the chairman for consent to introduce into the record the federal court opinion, the ethics complaint dismissal, the State Bar complaint dismissal, and related materials. And I'd also like to introduce a memo from Professors Ronald Rotunda and William Hodes concluding that, quote, the mere non-specific allegations of a party uncritically adopted by a state court judge and rejected by the state agencies with jurisdiction over ethics complaints cannot possibly have any bearing on Senator Sessions' ethical standing today.
In fact,
you say the federal court didn't question the reliability. The quote from the 11th Circuit is that the state court's opinion was, quote, particularly unreliable and misleading. Mr. Cole, my time has expired, but I would simply note the Federal Court of Appeals said, and I quote, the statement of facts was intended to exculpate Tyco, and thus it was self-serving and unreliable. That is a verbatim quote from the Federal Court of Appeals, and it's contrary to what you've just told this committee.
The March for Life rally will be at the Texas Capitol on January 28th. We will gather at 18th and North Congress for the march at 1 p.m. and then meet at the south steps of the Capitol at 2 p.m. to listen to speakers that will encourage you.
Abortion came upon our land of the free. The blood's been running since 73. In 30 years, 50 million died. God forgive us for our pride. The blood of 50 million lambs, unless we repent, is gonna take us down. How can we continue on? How can this be right when it's all so wrong? Can you hear the babies cry? Can you hear the babies cry? Can you hear the babies cry? Why have 50 million died? We got walking wounded everywhere. The women who did it, does anybody care? Those ladies need a healing touch for what they've lost and miss so much. Listen close as their heart cries for what they've lost and a baby that died. Like all of us who bought the lie, we can hear in our dreams the babies cry. Can you hear the babies cry? Can you hear the babies cry? Can you hear the babies cry? Why have 50 million died? God saw the men who made them go.
Since 1973, legal abortion has killed more African Americans than AIDS, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and violent crime combined. Every week, more blacks die in American abortion clinics than were killed in the entire Vietnam War. And the largest chain of abortion clinics in the United States is operated by Planned Parenthood.
Let's go back to the early 90s when pro-abortion and ambivalent politicians controlled the Texas governor's office, House, and Senate. A small group of pro-life activists, fed up with a constant stream of abortion victories, decided to do something about it. They organized an annual Texas rally for life at the Capitol to commemorate the tragedy of Roe v. Wade. They also tried to pass a parental notification bill and failed. The votes just weren't there. So Texas Alliance for Life worked to replace pro-abortion politicians with pro-life champions. Victory began in '94 with the election of Governor George W. Bush. With Bush's help, the fight for parental notification grew more intense. Each session, the pro-abortion stranglehold on the Texas legislature weakened. In '98, Texans elected Rick Perry as lieutenant governor. The very next year, parental notification passed. In 2003, the Texas legislature elected its first pro-life Speaker of the House. Finally, after a decade of hard campaigning, the governor, speaker, and lieutenant governor were all pro-life. The same year, Texas Alliance for Life crafted a personhood bill which recognizes unborn babies as persons in the eyes of the law. The bill passed 112 to 15. Joe Poyman, executive director of Texas Alliance for Life, unsatisfied with the parental notification law, worked with pro-life legislators on a new bill requiring parental consent. It passed in 2005, resulting in a huge drop in abortion on minor girls. But even with all these victories, abortion providers like Planned Parenthood received millions of tax dollars each year. So Texas Alliance for Life shifted focus to defund Planned Parenthood and to pass the sonogram law forcing abortion providers to inform women about their babies and give them more time to choose life. Suddenly, abortion facilities around Texas started closing their doors, but Texas Alliance for Life was just getting started. In 2013, they fought for the biggest pro-life bill yet, which an unruly mob killed at the last minute in an angry uproar. So Texas Alliance for Life worked with other groups throughout the state to organize an unprecedented grassroots effort. Thousands of pro-lifers flooded the Capitol daily to stand for life. The bill finally passed, banning abortion after 5 months and dramatically raising safety standards at abortion facilities. The result? Countless lives saved from the tragedy of abortion. What started as a small group of pro-life activists is now an alliance of more than 250,000 Texans who continue to defend innocent human life from conception to natural death. We won't stop. We won't give up. We will end abortion.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. Thus, the anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional.
I was born in 1973. In that year, the Supreme Court struck down a Texas law that protected the unborn. This decision makes abortion legal in all 50 states throughout all of pregnancy for any reason. Its name, Roe v. Wade.
In 1974, 20,000 pro-life activists marched on the United States Capitol. This is the first of what will become the annual March for Life.
In 1975, the year I was born, the first human life amendment is introduced into the U.S. Senate. The amendment fails.
In 1976, the Republican Party adopts a pro-life platform. The Democratic Party, not so much.
By 1977, the number of yearly abortions in America passes 1 million.
In 1978, the Chicago Sun-Times runs a series of articles exposing unsanitary conditions, unlicensed personnel, and inadequate anesthesia in abortion facilities.
Abortion safety regulations are overturned by the courts. In 1980, the Supreme Court upholds a federal ban on tax-funded abortions, one of our first national victories.
Pregnant minors can have an abortion without parental notification.
The RU-486 abortion pill is tested on women.
Abortion provider Carol Everett leaves the abortion industry. She later writes the book Blood Money, exposing abortion industry abuses, including botched abortions, which kill and maim mothers.
In 1984, there were 1.5 million abortions, double what they were in 1973.
In 1985, parental notification fails to pass in Texas.
Operation Rescue organizes sit-ins and other acts of civil disobedience around the country. Tens of thousands of pro-life activists are arrested.
In 1987, the number of abortions in America continued to rise.
In 1988, while in the womb, my mother has an abortion that kills my twin sibling. I survive.
1989, no pro-life legislation passes. Again.
In 1990, the year I was born, the number of abortions in America reaches an all-time high.
In 1991, the total number of abortions in the U.S. rises above 26 million. This means more aborted babies than the number of people living in Iowa, Colorado, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Tennessee combined.
In 1992, the United States Supreme Court reaffirms Roe v. Wade.
In 1993, the Clinton administration gives $75 million to Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion provider in America.
In 1994, Norma McCorvey, the Jane Roe in Roe v. Wade, converts into a pro-life champion.
1995, Congress passes the partial birth abortion ban. 1996, Clinton vetoes the partial birth abortion ban. Congress passes and Clinton vetoes the partial birth abortion ban. Again. Throughout the 90s, crisis pregnancy centers pop up all over the country, providing women with compassionate alternatives to abortion.
In 1999, Texas legislature passes the Parental Notification Act, the first major pro-life victory in Texas, and we are just getting started.
In 2000, the year I was born, the FDA approves the RU-486 abortion pill.
In 2001, abortions on minor girls decline. Parental involvement rises.
2002, Texas Supreme Court upholds ban on tax-funded abortions.
Congress passes the partial birth abortion ban again. This time, President Bush signs it into law. The pro-life argument starts the first 4 days life in College Station, Texas.
2005, parental consent passes.
Late-term abortions plummet 80%.
In 2007, the U.S. Supreme Court upholds partial birth abortion ban.
The Texas Prenatal Protection Act survives a court challenge. Planned Parenthood Director Abby Johnson quits. And now she's pro-life. Sonic Lamar.
What will the future hold? Laws that protect women and babies from the horrors of abortion. A culture that values life from conception through natural death.
My generation will end abortion.
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 My generation. My generation.
My generation.
My generation.
My generation.
My generation.
My generation.
My generation.
My generation.
My generation.
My generation.
My generation will end abortion.
Well, Toni, you fought a little for your freedom. As you were sharing with us, when please tell your story. I know people are going to be blessed as they hear what all transpired in your life too.
Well, I was 18 when I got pregnant with my boyfriend, and
he really wanted me to have an abortion. I immediately said no, because I believed in life. I also didn't believe that it was my choice to impose that on anyone else. So I was pro-choice at the time. But I believed that for myself, that this was a child inside of me, and there was no way I was going to have an abortion. So we went through a lot of, I went through a lot of emotional coercion from him. He just struck my every nerve of insecurities that I had as a young child and as a young abused child growing up. So it was very difficult for me to not believe that I could go on with life with a child. So to stop this, and I decided to go into a women's health clinic with him that he made an appointment for, believing that these are trained professionals, nurses and doctors, that were going to help me be able to make my choice that I wanted to make, was to choose life. So when I went into the clinic, I found out that that was not the case at all. And I was led back to a room by a nurse, and alone. It was her and I. No one was really talking to me a whole lot. I didn't know what was going on. I was very scared at the age of 18, out on my own. And she motioned for me to sit in this chair. Immediately when I sat down, it was like the moment my body made contact with that chair, I just came overwhelmed with tears, so much crying that I could barely see in front of me. And I stood up at the instant that that happened, and I told the nurse, I said, I'm not here for an abortion. I want to leave. I need to get out of here. I just got very nervous and very scared because no one was talking to me. So as soon as I took a step forward, this nurse put her hands on my shoulders. She pushed me back down in the chair, and she is holding me there up in this chair as I was crying. She took a needle out of her pocket like that she was ready for this, and she stabbed me in the arm. And I was out within seconds as I was crying and screaming at her, please don't do this to me. Over and over and over. Please don't do this to me. So I woke up later on, the nurse staring at me from across the room, kind of foggy and out of it, and they had performed an abortion on me while I was out. Having to need help getting to my car because they weren't even going to wait until I was fully come to, and that was it. So for the rest of my life from there on, until I found out the truth, I blamed myself for walking into that clinic thinking that these people were here to help me. I literally told myself and believed the lie that I was just the most uneducated, stupidest person on this earth to not know that when you walk into abortion clinic, your rights are taken away from you. You no longer have that choice. And I just assumed since that happened that everyone must have known that except me. And growing up being told that I'm stupid my whole life and I'm not smart and I'll never amount to anything, it was very easy for me to believe that this is true too. That if I told people what happened, I'm going to be laughed at, I'm going to be ridiculed. Like, well, who goes to a women's health clinic knowing you cannot walk out with your child? And so I didn't tell anyone for the longest time. It was many, many years after I've been married, after I've had children. And for a long time, I just tried to forget about it. And I couldn't watch shows about parents with kids. I couldn't watch shows about births on TV. It was just too overwhelming for me. So I avoided those things to distract myself and not have to face what happened. So here in Austin, there is an abortion clinic on Anderson Mill that I kept driving by. And I would see people with signs out there holding up signs, which is the only reason why I knew it was an abortion clinic. And it reminded me a lot of the same clinic that this happened to me at. So one day I stopped in there because I felt like I needed to get this off of my back. I needed healing. And I had just started counseling at the time, and this was the first issue I really addressed. So I wrote a note to my child, and I happened to have this pendant in my house that just said mother around it. And I folded it up in that note, and I walked up to that abortion clinic as close as I could. I was just too emotional to even walk up to the front door. For some reason, I really wanted to touch the building touch those red bricks, because it reminded me of the red bricks I touched when I was walking into that abortion clinic where I'm from. And I buried it under this bush up there by the front door, my letter. And then I walked back to the street, and there's this mailbox, and there's lots of, there's some oak trees and some bamboo, and I kind of sat under them up against the mailbox, and I just stared at this clinic. And I started praying. I was crying, and I was so overwhelmed. And I prayed to God, and I said, I can't believe I still get emotional over this. I said,
we all are too.
I told him, I said, I am not leaving until I don't have this burden anymore. I'm not leaving. I don't know. I planned on staying there for weeks if that's what it took. I was not going to leave because I was so tired of carrying that guilt and that shame. And at this time, I knew it wasn't my fault. I learned through counseling that people aren't supposed to do that to you. You're supposed to have a choice. There is laws that were set up that were supposed to give us that choice, but it was taken away from me. So I sat there, and my husband got worried about me. He called me up, and I told him where I was, and he came and sat there next to me, and it was just quiet, the two of us, and I cried. And here's the amazing part. All of a sudden, through the shade, through the leaves of the trees and the bamboos, came hundreds and thousands of rays of light shining down on us. I could see each individual ray just shining down on me, and I became overwhelmed with peace, happiness, joy, forgiveness. And I just sat there and soaked it all in. It's like I couldn't move. I couldn't say anything. I have no idea if my husband saw it or not. I didn't even I've never even asked them. I was so overwhelmed by it, and just by the forgiveness and the peace I was feeling. And then it just disappeared. And I turned to my husband and I said, okay, I'm ready to go. It was like that burden, it was gone. And we're walking back to our cars, and he stopped me. Because I have 4 children, and I had 4 children at this time when this happened. And he looked at me and he said, you know, you've got 4 wonderful children at home that love you. And I just stopped. And I looked at him, I said, no, I don't. And this is the first time I ever said this. I have 5. I have 5 children that love me. And we went home. And that's, you know, kind of the short version of what happened. I did some research later on about the doctor who performed this abortion. When I did this research, I never saw his face because I was out. I did have nightmares ever since then about a man I didn't know sexually abusing me. And I found out that he is in prison right now for sexually abusing women that he drugged in his abortion clinic.
Wow.
And so it's good to know that, he got put in jail for at least sexually abusing women. He wasn't put in jail for forcing abortions, but through that story and through testifying at the state capitol and telling other people, I've met so many people that have gone through a forced abortion. Almost similar stories to mine, which amazes me, because I really thought that I must be the only person in the world, because this stuff happens in China, if not worse, not in America, not with laws that we have. But it's amazing how these doctors can take advantage of young girls who are insecure, have no parental authority in their life at the time, and take advantage of them and force their will on them. And it does happen.
You know, the forced abortions is something that I was unfamiliar with. I had heard of the sexual abuse. Once the girls had been drugged, I'd heard of these stories. But the forced abortion, where you go in and, you know, against your will, they drug you, knock you out, and perform the abortion.
Right.
You know, these are stories that, you know, it's an evil industry anyway. But, you know, this just, for people to know that these things are occurring makes you not even want to go in the first place, if you even thought about it in the first place.
Yeah.
And you don't feel like you were stupid. I mean, you know, there's...
And that's the thing, is it was titled a women's health clinic.
Yeah.
And that is where it really gets you. Like, this is a place where there's educated professionals. I could have swore they took like a Hippocratic oath or something.
yeah.
They're supposed to be there for their patient, and that wasn't the case at all, not even close. Not even close. As you know, he's in prison right now for hundreds of women that he abused in his clinic.
For forced abortion. Today, there's the availability of anyone who does not want to have an abortion, and anyone is pressuring them, whether it's parents or dad of the child, whether singles or married. There is now the Center Against Forced Abortion. You can Google that. You can go to the website with the justicefoundation.org. You can get legal documents that will be given, and you'll get legal assistance, someone to be with you, whatever is needed in order to give this to those who are trying to pressure you, and another document that will be given to abortion centers in that area so that they know that you don't want an abortion, and if they perform an abortion on you, then they are liable for legal action.
Wow, I didn't realize this was, that's great information right there.
Maybe a year and a half ago too, and we are networking with attorneys that will represent people where they are.
There's lots of young girls that are coerced into getting this because they're by their parents.
By their parents, that's right. Which destroys
so
the family.
This document that she's talking about will help if you know a minor, or maybe you're a minor yourself.
Anyone
or you have
of
friends.
any age, 14 to 44.
Any age, yeah.
If it is not their desire to have an abortion, to help them.
That's the Center for Abuse.
Center Against Forced Abortion.
The Center Against Forced Abortion.
Right.
Wow. Just Google that. That's excellent information. Toni, what a healing too. I mean, to be.
Yes.
But when we petitioned God hard, that's what you'd done. You'd written the letter, wrapped it in a mother pendant, buried it, and then you sat under the tree and said, "Lord, I'm not leaving until you do something." And praise God for that.
I was done hanging on to that. I was done with that secret.
That's good.
Awesome.
Sometimes that's what we have to. We have to reach. He says, "The violent take heaven by storm."
Right.
Sometimes we have to sit at the gate and say, "Lord, we're not leaving until we have an answer."
Yeah.
And these secrets have held women down and back and broken for way too long.
Yes.
Giving your testimony, sharing with others. Sometimes just having a trusted friend to talk to.
Exactly.
Helps set you free. So praise God for that. What a story. When you first told me about the lights coming down, I was wow.